The Denver Broncos 2022 rookie draft class reported to the team facility on Friday and Saturday over the weekend at the UCHealth Training Center, and rumors have it that they've been shining in practice. Which players have stood out? Plus, we hear from some of the coordinators and their thoughts on the offense, defense, and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked On NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos beat reporter and analyst for Mile High Sports, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. He's the lead expert over there, predominantlyorange.com, and we both cover the Denver Broncos here for the Locked On Network and 9 News. And Broncos country, just want to say thank you so much for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Sayre, Broncos rookies reported on Friday and Saturday of last week for their rookie minicamp, getting acclimated to becoming a Denver Bronco. We got a lot of great tidbits out of some pressers from a lot of the rookies and even the coaches here. I'm excited to break all that action down on today's episode of the show.
I'm really excited, Cody. I love, obviously, getting to see the rookies in their new jerseys, their new uniforms a little bit out there. Get to see. I'm one of those people, Cody, that back when I used to play Madden, like I spent way more time adjusting the guys' face masks and like whether or not they had a visor and what wristbands they were wearing, what number they were wearing. So I'm looking at all that stuff out there on the field. Like what kind of face mask this guy pick? What kind of visor is he rocking? All that swag for, when they're on the field, you got to look good. And man, these guys, it sounds like from everything, they're looking good and they're playing really good. So I'm really pumped about this rookie class. I think you and I were justified a few weeks ago in our excitement over this class. The more and more you dig in, the more and more it looks like, there's going to be some instant impact from these guys.
There really is, and that was the vibe that the coaches, offensive coordinator Justin Outten, defensive coordinator Ejiro Evero, special teams coordinator Dwayne Stukes, all mentioned that there are just some guys in this class that are ready to go professional. And one thing that kind of stood out to me, though, Sayre, that really summarizes these rookies is the fact that they're embracing the Bronco way, and they've only really been acclimated with 2 days of work, Friday and Saturday, putting what they've learned a little bit in the classroom, which has been very brief from the time they were drafted, having to come in, having to sign their contract, having to pass physicals, and then going onto the football field. They've been translating it very quick. And obviously the Broncos coaching staff is the collaborative nature. Heck, you even had some veteran players out there watching. Like, they're not participating. We had veteran players out there just observing. KJ Hamler was a notable guy that was observing practice this past weekend at the UCHealth Training Center. But there's one of the players that we want to talk about a little bit more here, and that's Greg Dulcich, who shops at Dulcich and Gabbana. That's a little bit of a pun I wanted to throw in there. I wanted to find a way to come up with something creative there. But the skill set that he has, offense coordinator Justin Outten has said, has translated really well so far to what they're seeing on the practice field. Obviously, everyone's talking about the short shorts, the hair, but his athleticism is something that is standing out right away. And here's what offensive coordinator Justin Outten had to say. He said that Greg has done an excellent job out here learning the small amount of the game plan that was presented to him. He's done a really good job with it. He's on his details, and the athletic ability that we saw on video is carrying over to the field. And obviously, going from the college game, Sayre, to the pro game, there's going to be an adjustment period. Outten says the adjustment after this is going to be what we need to evaluate moving forward, obviously with a bigger playbook than probably what he's more used to and more responsibility and just kind of handling everything else like a rookie coming onto the field. You have a lot more time in your hands in how you handle that, but he's been a really good pro so far with everything. So far, Dulcich has been everything as advertised so far, but I do have to remind people, everybody looks great on air, but the fact that he's picking things up and doing the little things, I think is the most important takeaway to grab here from Greg Dulcich.
I think so too. And you read some of the people who were at practices, or at least the parts that, were viewable for the media and everything like that. And it really does sound like Dulcich, he looks the part. I mean, he's a big guy. He's obviously got strong hands and he moves extremely well for his size. And it sounds like all those things really translated over the course of the rookie minicamp. I mean, you don't want to overhype guys too much for what they do in their short shorts and their long socks, but at the same time, Greg Dulcich, I think what we saw from him at UCLA, averaging over 17 yards per catch over the last 2 seasons, he brings that big playability to your offense. And the Broncos, obviously, they talked about that on the Behind the Broncos documentary, right? They talked about he gives us something we don't have. He gives us something we don't have. Well, what's that something they don't have? I think that vertical threat at the tight end position, and yes, Albert Okwuegbunam, a tremendous athlete with tremendous speed, but he's much more a red zone option, a body control guy, after the catch kind of guy. He's the kind of guy that can get 2 feet down when he's surrounded by 3 defenders in the back of the end zone, whereas Greg Dulcich is the kind of guy that you can push the ball vertical at the tight end position. So they really complement each other well. I'm very excited with the early just returns or the early opinions of what people are seeing from Dulcich. And it just sounds like he's going to be a natural transition from college to the NFL.
I can't wait to see him at training camp. I can't wait to see some action of him inside the NFL preseason in August. We know the Broncos' 3 opponents, the Cowboys, at the Buffalo Bills, and then you have a home game against the Minnesota Vikings. It's one thing I'm looking forward to for the preseason. A lot of people don't care about the preseason, but Sayre Bedinger and myself, we love the preseason. We love training camp, and you can get all that exclusive coverage here at the Locked On Broncos podcast. But there's also another player that we want to talk about as well, and he's going to get a lot of run on today's episode of the show, and that is Montrell Washington, the wide receiver, kick returner, weapon, jack of all trades. They're out of Sanford. Now, one thing that Justin Outten, the Broncos OC, had said about him this week, kind of asked a little bit about maybe what his role could be like on the offensive side of the ball, how they could use him. And he says it's more of a speed type thing. You can use him for fly sweeps. You can use him for end arounds, maybe actually handing him the ball in this situation. You can use him downfield and blow the top off the defense. With him, it's just the evaluation of how much he can handle at this point with the playbook itself. With time, I think it will come. He's just a different element for an explosive mindset because he's a different body in that room. Different is never bad. It's always good to find packages for guys like that, and it's as much as they can handle. And I can't help but think at this point what he's describing is the role that KJ Hamler will play. So you have a great, as we said it, you have a great insurance policy if he can pick up the offense in training camp behind a KJ Hamler. Heck, you could use both of them, Sayre, if they both emerge. Could you imagine the speed that those two guys have downfield? Oh, the Broncos can get very creative.
I'm just trying to imagine, Cody. This is very difficult. All I'm seeing in my mind is a blank canvas, but imagining utilizing offensive weapons. I mean, that painting has yet to be painted in my brain, at least over the last 6 years. But I'm very excited about the possibilities, right? Because Montrell Washington is an exciting playmaker, and they did find any and every way to get him the ball when you watch him play at Sanford. I mean, so he's used to that, right? Which is great. And you mentioned the KJ Hamler. That's the role that they're probably going to be building for him. And I completely agree with you there. I also think maybe does this coaching staff kind of piece a little bit from what we saw from Brian Daboll and the offensive staff in Buffalo with what they did with Isaiah McKenzie? Because really that's the kind of package that I envision early on for Montrell Washington. Not necessarily, hey, you're going to go out there and you're going to get 60 targets as a rookie. Well, that may not necessarily be the case, but that's okay. He may get 30. He may get something around there, a couple of targets a game, a couple of touches a game. But it's finding ways like Justin Outten is talking about. You want to maximize his speed and the ability that he has to create in space, create in the open field. He's a playmaker, so let him do playmaker things. I don't care how they get him the ball. I'm excited to see, hey, a couple punt returns, a couple kick returns, hand him the ball. Like you said, actually hand him the ball on the jet sweep, or maybe just throw him the ball and see what he can do after the catch a time or two on a given week. I think there's unlimited potential here for the offense, given the fact that everybody else is going to be drawing so much attention.
Well, you mentioned a blank canvas, and all I can see, touchdowns, deep crossing patterns. Not to mention, we saw the video over the weekend of Peyton Manning and Russell Wilson watching film together, going through that thought process there. Obviously, Broncos country loves to see things like that. But one thing that we love to see is the fact that the Broncos have coaches that collaborate within the process, the scouting process. And we're going to find out how Broncos wide receiver Montrell Washington got onto the Broncos radar during the scouting process in the 2022 NFL Draft. You get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about BetOnline.net, the sponsor of today's episode of the show. And our partners at BetOnline.net continue to be the number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. You can find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. As we jump into the second half action on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, real quick, mile-high salute to everybody in Broncos country. Thank you so much for making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, or whether you're watching us here on YouTube. Do us a quick favor. If you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and make sure you smash that like button and comment for the algorithm, as well as we continue to bring you daily Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. Sayre, one thing that we found out over the weekend is how Montrell Washington fell onto the Broncos' radar for the 2022 NFL draft process. And it wasn't because of Dwayne Stukes. It was because of wide receiver coach Zach Azzanni. And I like this. And Dwayne Stukes had mentioned in a presser this weekend that Zach Azzanni approached him and said, hey, there's this guy that I've been watching on tape. He's a slot receiver, but he can provide us an explosive dynamic in the return game. He gave him the tape. He watched it, and he said, hey, I was really blown away by Montrell Washington out of Stanford. He says it wasn't just the tape against Florida that stood out to me. It was his collective body of work, the consistency that we saw from him. He was an impact playmaker for Stanford, and now the Broncos hope that he could be an impact playmaker for them on special teams. But Sayre, for Montrell Washington, he did meet with the media this weekend, and he was asked a question as to what makes him a dynamic returner. What did he have to say?
He had a great answer to that question, actually, Cody. He compared it to backyard football, which I really resonated with. I remember we used to play the 500. You remember the game 500? Somebody call out a number, and if you catch the ball, you accumulate points. And the last round, it'd be like, all right, if you get to 500, then everybody just comes after you. He compared it to that. He's like, he says, I'm fearless. I just think I'm fearless back there. Just catch it and go. It's like a game, I guess. And it really is. It's just like when you're playing backyard football as a kid. You get the ball, they throw the ball for a kickoff, or they kick it off to you, and all of a sudden every kid is just trying to get you because you got the ball and they want the ball. So I love that mentality. It's like it hasn't changed for him, and that means to me it's just innate. It's written in his DNA. This is what you do when the ball comes your way, which, remember, that's been such a a touchy point for the Broncos the last handful of years. It's like, well, finally we got somebody that could actually catch punts. Now we need somebody that can go make plays once they catch the punt. So I'm really excited about that. And I love that you brought up the Zach Azzanni, Dwayne Stukes thing. Just Zach Azzanni continues to impress with just the way that he goes about his job, right? I mean, he was obviously a big recruiting voice when he was at Central Michigan, at Tennessee. And so you got to remember, being at Central Michigan, you're not landing all the same guys that the Michigan Wolverines are getting, or the same guys that Michigan State is landing. You're having to dig deep and find these guys. And I love that he did a similar type of thing here for Montrell Washington in the NFL with the Denver Broncos. And you also love to see that when he brought somebody to Dwayne Stukes, it caught the new special teams coordinator's attention.
Well, the fact that for, a guy like Zach Azzanni, I think his work kind of speaks for itself. I mean, you look at the wide receivers, you look at the production, you look at the mentality that these guys have inside that room there. But the fact that he's been on this coaching staff, I believe this is his third regime in Denver. He's under Nathaniel Hackett. He made it through the Vance Joseph. He made it through the Vic Fangio era. He was a carryover there when the Broncos did move on from a lot of guys from those staffs. When they brought in a new head coach, when the year that they brought in Vic, they got rid of a lot of those old coaches. They kept Curtis Modkins. They kept Zach Azzanni, just some of the guys to name a few. But then Azzanni is, I believe, outside of Coach Kolar, who is now he's a consultant on the defensive side of the ball. Those are really the two guys, if I'm not mistaken, that have actually survived and have been on this coaching staff, I think, since 2018. Yeah. So, hey, that's very, very impressive in that feat. And obviously Christian Parker being a carryover from last year's staff, just the Broncos coaches continue to do it. But let's shift our focus now to Dwayne Stukes, the Broncos special teams coordinator, who is tasked with a very tough job in trying to turn around the Broncos bottom ranked special teams unit from last season and turning it into at least a top 15 and hopefully a top 10 unit here in the 2022 NFL season. Now, one thing we were talking about on, a few weeks ago when we were talking about this show, when the Broncos had OTAs, they were having guys there, and we were being very specific, like who was name dropped. And Dwayne Stukes was very cognizant of that. He was asked the question if there were any tryout players that have caught his attention. And this was his quote. This is exactly what he said. He said, you know what? I told myself the last time I mentioned guys, I'm going to stop naming names. I thought as a group, it was one of the better rookie groups that I've been around in the 15 years that I've been coaching. I think that those guys came in focused. They came in determined. And I think that they're trying to prove that they belong. And they want to show the vets that they belong. I think they did a good job this weekend, which I think is more probably worthy and collective praise. Like anytime we see name drops, we're like, okay, hey, we could probably pencil that guy in as long as he plays well in the preseason. He'll probably be a lock for the active roster. But for him, not really naming names in this situation, I think is a good thing, especially this early on in rookie minicamp, because I think also there's a psychology behind it. A rookie sees that, hey, coach mentioned me. All right, bam. Sometimes that could be very detrimental, I think, for an athlete because they can feel like they've already had it made. But it also goes back to Montrell Washington was asked a question as well, talking about, has it processed for you that you're in the NFL yet? And really, he had a great answer. He said, look, I'm really hungry. I haven't done anything yet. I haven't made it. I have a lot to prove, and I'm just going to keep working and do my job. I love that mentality there from Montrell Washington. It seems like a lot of these young guys have that, and it seems like something that this coaching staff has kind of empowered them to have internally.
Which I love, right? I think that's exactly the mindset you want to have. Like you got Greg Dulcich, who's out there talking about, hey, I still approach like I'm a walk-on, right? I still work like that. I love that stuff, man. And I love the fact that all of these guys, no matter where they were drafted, they kind of bring that mentality to the table. I mean, Matt Henningsen was also a walk-on. And then you got Montrell Washington, who he even stated right after he was drafted, he's like, I didn't think I was getting drafted. So you have all these guys with a mentality of like, hey, I really want to go prove this team right that picked me, because they understand what it's like to have to really fight for your spot and to be wanted by somebody. That changes such a dynamic for somebody that's trying to make an NFL team, right? It's like you went from, okay, finally you reached the point where you're a scholarship athlete in college. Now you got to go to the NFL and earn your stripes again. So you've made it in a matter of speaking at the college level, but now you kind of got to start over. But you have it in your mindset now to say, this is what I've got to do because I've already done to a certain degree. So I love the mentality all these guys are bringing to the table. It was a blast to get to hear from this entire rookie class, right? And kudos to the Broncos PR department, Patrick Smythe and everybody for making them available, because it really does give us a great insight into these guys and who they are and how they operate, how they're wired, and it makes it all the more fun.
It really does, getting to know these players and really the ambitions that these guys have. And not to mention, look, you got the rookies, you got the undrafted guys in, but the Broncos also brought over some guys that didn't play as much last year that are entering year number 2 in their career. Seth Williams being one of those guys. So it's great to see some of these extra guys, Marquise Spencer, getting some extra work at Broncos rookie minicamp. And hey, anytime you get a chance to get on that football field, it's another opportunity to prove that you belong, which is super, super important. We'll have OTA scattered throughout this month, next month, and then there'll be a little bit of a brief time until training camp at the end of July. But one thing you can bank on here is that Locked On Broncos will have continuous coverage every single day all year long, because for the true fan, there is never an off season. But Broncos country coming up here in just a moment. We're going to hear from Broncos defensive coordinator Ejiro Evero. He shed light on the defense, including name dropping a rookie and making a very interesting comparison to him. Plus, also talking about Baron Browning's transition to edge rusher. You get that much more coming up here in just a moment. But first, let me tell you about Built Bar, the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And as you all know, Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar that is out there on the market today. They have 9 amazing original flavors, plus the occasional limited time flavor, which is the birthday cake puff. And Built Bar just sent both Sayre and myself a box of Built Puffs with the birthday cake flavor. And I tell you what, it is fantastic. It's imagine dipping your finger into that plastic tub of birthday cake frosting and then opening your eyes and realizing that it was only 150 calories and 16 grams of protein. That is what it's like to eat birthday cake puff from Built. And if you haven't tried the puffs, I'll let you on a little secret, because that's what friends do: a chocolate-covered marshmallow protein bar. Yes, with birthday cake flavor. They also have the churro puffs. And make sure you go to built.com to get your hands on a box today. And each bar contains around 17 grams of protein, 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. And you can get a box today for 15% off when you go to checkout and you enter promo code LOCKED15. That's one word, LOCKED15, and that'll get you 15% off your next order at built.com. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Once again, Broncos country, thank you so much for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. If you don't do so already, we highly encourage you to do so, and here's why. When you wake up and you want to know the latest as to what's going on with the Denver Broncos from an objective point of view, you get that here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. Plus, you get a chance to interact with both Sayre and myself. We always value your interaction from everybody in Broncos country. Sayre, let's continue on with today's episode of the show, my friend. And Ejiro Evero met with the media on Saturday following the Broncos OTA rookie minicamp practice at the UCHealth Training Center in Inglewood, Colorado. And there were a lot of things he talked about, from just getting to see these rookies, Damari Mathis, Faion Hicks, Ioma Uwazurike, what he's seen from him, and gave a little bit of an update on Matt Henningsen, who obviously had a mild calf strain and left practice on Saturday. Something to monitor. He said he should be fine. So, hey, obviously a big sigh of relief there for Broncos country. He has a chance to be a little bit of an anchor. Could be a Derek Wolfe type player for the Broncos. That's been a comp that's been thrown out there a little bit about him, but we'll see how things go. But there is one player, Sayre, that he did mention, and it's somebody that we like, and it is Delarrin Turner-Yell. And he mentioned him as one of those standout guys in rookie minicamp. And here's exactly what he had to say in terms of the scouting process and how he viewed him initially. He says, coming out of college, he was a good player. He was a very good leader. And that's one thing that I've noticed. And you saw on tape as well, as his command. He comes out here, and even though he doesn't know the defense very well, he's a sharp kid, and he's only been exposed for 2 days, but he just has command in everything that he does. There's confidence in everything that he does. And that's the most important thing, is the safety, that communication ability. And he's been very impressive so far. And after reading this, for me, Sayre, I didn't have any expectations that Delarrin would be a starter for the Broncos on the defensive side this season. But I just can't help but think, knowing that, what Ejiro Evero said about him, and knowing that he's in a room with Justin Simmons and Kareem Jackson, that can only benefit Delarrin here in the future.
Well, it sounds like where he's going, Cody, they won't need any roads, right? I mean, that's exactly.
Only some people will get what you just said.
Yeah, I hope they do. I hope they do. We have Dulcich and Gabbana. We've got the Delarrin, heading where there are no roads needed. I love it. But yes, in regards to the quote that Ejiro Evero, shared with him, I think you really saw that come across as I was watching and studying Nick Bonito for our episode devoted to kind of just like, what's his game like? What is he going to bring to the Broncos? I realized in watching him over a handful of games last year, Delarrin Turner-Yell actually was injured for a few of them. And you saw a huge difference in the way that their defense played when he was on the field versus when he wasn't on the field. And I think communication is a huge, huge, huge issue that you'll notice. If you go back and watch some of those games, you watch the game against Nebraska, where there's constant miscommunication in the secondary and issues back there. There was a number of games, and then you watch the difference between last year's Baylor game as well, when Delarrin Turner-Yell came back, and they actually did a really good job defensively against Baylor. So there was a lot of that you saw from him, and I like that. And I like that the coaches had, it seems like, a pretty heavy involvement in this year's draft, right? They weren't necessarily on the staff for a ton of time, but they obviously poured in all the hours to be able to go in and say, hey, I really like this guy as a fit for our defense. And what really intrigues me about the defensive backs that the Broncos selected is the fact that they have so many key coaches that are defensive back guys, right? They've got obviously Ejiro Evero, defensive back. Specifically, he was once the safeties coach for the Los Angeles Rams. Then you got Christian Parker back there. And it's really cool to see that kind of stuff. And obviously there's the new coaches that have come in to be assistants in that unit as well. So I think it's really cool to see when you bring in young coaches that have specific areas of expertise and pair them up with young players at those positions. That to me is something worth monitoring, because you can't help but wonder about their development. And speaking of that, we know that there's another player whose development is definitely up in the air, so to speak, at this point for the Denver Broncos.
Well, I think a lot of people are wondering about Baron Browning. Obviously, the rumors have been out there that he is transitioning to the outside linebacker position, which when you look at the Broncos' edge rusher depth right now, and especially after the NFL draft, a lot of people are wondering, like, why are the Broncos going to move him to edge? And look, this is my hunch, Sayre, and this has not been confirmed by anybody or anything. I don't think he's making a full-time transition to edge rusher. I think he's learning it now, but I think primarily in training camp, you're going to see him split 50-50 time there, or maybe even 60-40, depending on the personnel, depending on the package. He was too good last year in the little action that he had at inside linebacker as the wheel backer, though, Sayre. I just can't see them moving him away from that position and moving him to edge rusher, where they don't necessarily need him to be there right now. However, in certain package situations, I can see that. Not much clarity, though, as is. But here's what Ejiro Evero had to say about that. He said that he's done a great job. He did really well in the first minicamp that we had, and he really displayed some things and showed some really good rush ability. Obviously, with the transition, he has to get better at some of the fundamentals in terms of hitting blocks and setting the edge, and he's been doing a great, great job. He's been working his butt off and he's coming along. So this kind of tells me, Sayre, this is what I'm taking away from it. He's learning it, because when they do plan to put him at edge rusher, I imagine it's going to be in an impact role, but I primarily still see him as an inside linebacker. And I think a lot of Broncos country's freaking out about not knowing what exactly he's going to be doing, but I would hazard a guess and say he's going to be doing both probably.
Yeah, I think that seems to be where things are headed, right? They kind of know what he can do at the inside linebacker position, at least to a degree. But at the same time, it is very interesting, isn't it? You bring in Randy Gregory, you go out and you draft Nick Bonito. You've already got plenty of depth off the edge, at least on paper. And right now you're teaching Baron Browning the ropes at that spot. And he did do a little bit of that at Ohio State, and he was very, very good at it when he was asked to do it. So I'm intrigued to see what the plan is. I think that it's kind of angering a lot of fans because we don't really know, like, what is the actual plan? Like, are you going to make him a full-time edge? And if it is full-time, then what is to become of Bradley Chubb? What's to become of, like, what's your plan for Nick Bonito? And if it's part-time, it's like, well, why have him focus on it part-time? Is it just so that he can, kind of get his feet wet as an edge, or is it because you want to utilize him in certain packages like you mentioned? I think just the fact of, like, we don't really know what's his plan. I think everybody wants to see Baron Browning on the field as much as possible. And I think the clearest path that everyone sees to that right now is him playing inside linebacker.
Yeah.
And so that's maybe the tension point right now. So I'm fascinated to see, because I feel like you and I have talked about this, and I felt like this when he was drafted. I feel like his potential is much greater off the edge than a lot of people maybe gave him credit. So I'm willing to see this through and see what happens. But the one thing that I think all of us agree we don't want to see is Baron Browning not on the field, when he could be, over a guy like maybe Alex Singleton. I know he gets singled out a lot in this, and it's nothing against him personally. Yeah, no need to single out Mr. Singleton. And all due respect to him, he's an NFL athlete, which is amazing. But I think that people have an issue with that. Like, you're putting Singleton on the field and keeping Browning off the field, potentially barring injury to somebody. I just think that's the part where people kind of disagree with the tactic or the strategy behind moving him to the edge.
I think we are all excited to figure out what the strategy will be and how Ejiro Evero and Nathaniel Hackett plan to utilize Baron Browning on this defense side of the ball, especially considering this is a George Paton draft pick. And George, I don't think, is going to let anything happen to where he falls off to the wayside. I think that's the concern that Broncos fans have. Is he going to be pushed off to the side and then you're going to have other guys playing in front of him? I certainly hope that's not the case. I don't believe that is going to be the case. And I'll keep my optimistic hat on this side of things here, Sayre. But Broncos country, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Locked On Broncos podcast every single day on your favorite audio podcasting platform or here in video format on YouTube. Make sure you hit that subscribe or that follow button. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to like this video on YouTube and comment for the algorithm. We love to interact with you in the comment section as well. And if you want to tweet us, you can on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. But Broncos country, that will wrap up today's episode of the show here today. Throughout the week, you're going to get more Broncos news, content, and coverage. And we're going to focus on why Tim Patrick could have his biggest season yet for the Broncos as well. Our expectation series continues all throughout the offseason here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. We'll catch you tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show.